Welcome back to Silent Paws and Brave Hearts. The infant's cry wasn't a cry anymore. It was a rhythmic, rattling wheeze, the sound of a candle flame flickering in a gale, moments away from being extinguished by the dark. Caleb Ward stopped dead in his tracks. In the frozen expanse of Willow Creek Park, the midnight wind howled like a wounded animal, throwing sheets of white powder against his face. Most people would have heard nothing but the storm, but Caleb's ears were tuned to a different frequency, a frequency honed in the valleys of the Hindu Kush and the salt-sprayed nights of the Arabian Sea. It was the sound of distress. At his side, Titan, the massive German shepherd, went from a steady trot to a statuesque freeze. His ears were pinned forward, his nostrils flared, catching the scent of salt, wet wool, and the unmistakable metallic tang of fear. "Titan, mark," Caleb whispered. The dog didn't bark. He lunged forward, not in an attack, but in a focused surge toward a cluster of skeletal oaks near the frozen creek bed. Caleb followed, his boots heavy in the knee-deep drifts. His heart, which he had tried to keep under lock and key since his discharge, began to hammer against his ribs with a familiar, tactical urgency. Behind a snow-covered bench, huddled in the hollow of a tree, sat a boy. He looked like a small blue ghost. He wore a thin denim jacket, utterly useless against the 10-degree temperature, and his hands were bare, clutching a bundle of ragged flannel to his chest. The boy's eyes met Caleb's. They were wide, glassy, and shadowed by a terror no 7-year-old should ever know. Sir, my baby sister is freezing. She won't wake up anymore." Caleb dropped to his knees, the ice soaking into his tactical trousers, but he didn't feel it. He reached out, his large, scarred hands gently peeling back a layer of the wet flannel. Inside was Emily. Her skin wasn't pink, it was the color of wood ash. "Titan, heel, warmth," Caleb commanded. The dog understood. Titan pressed his massive, radiating body against the boy's side, providing an immediate wall of heat. Caleb unzipped his heavy parka, the one that had seen him through mountain winters and lonely nights. "What's your name, son?" Caleb asked, his voice low and steady, the voice of a man who had led teams through fire. "Lucas," the boy whispered. "I tried to keep her warm. I gave her my sweater, but the wind took it." "Lucas, look at me," Caleb said, locking eyes with the boy. "I'm Caleb. I'm a Navy SEAL. Do you know what that is?" The boy shook his head weakly. "It means I don't leave people behind, and I'm not leaving you, but we have to move, now." Caleb scooped the bundle into the crook of his arm, tucked against his own chest, and pulled Lucas under the flap of his coat. He stood up, the weight of the two children feeling both light and impossibly heavy. He didn't look back at the park. He looked only at the distant glow of his truck's headlights, a beacon in the swirling white void. The heater in the truck was screaming, pushing out a wall of artificial desert heat. Caleb sat in the driver's seat, but he wasn't driving yet. He had Emily stripped down to her base layer, tucked directly against his skin beneath his shirt. It was a technique he'd learned for field medicine, skin-to-skin contact, the most efficient way to transfer life-saving warmth. Lucas sat in the passenger seat, wrapped in a wool emergency blanket Caleb kept in the kit. Titan was in the back, leaning over the console, his warm breath huffing against the back of Lucas's neck. "Where is your mom, Lucas?" Caleb asked, his eyes never leaving the baby's face, watching for the slightest flutter of an eyelid. Lucas looked out the window at the dark trees. "She said stay. She said she had to go see the medicine man. She told us she'd be back before the stars came out. But the stars never came out, sir. Only the snow." Caleb's jaw tightened. He knew what medicine man meant in this part of town.
He knew the scourge that turned mothers into shadows and children into collateral damage. A cold, sharp anger flared in his gut, the kind of anger he usually reserved for the enemies of his country, but he pushed it down. Anger wouldn't warm this baby. "I tried to be brave," Lucas whispered, his voice breaking as the heat began to thaw his frozen nerves. "I told her stories. I told her about the summer. But she got so quiet. I thought she was just tired." "You were more than brave, Lucas," Caleb said, his voice thick. "You were a soldier tonight. You kept your post." The baby gave a small, sharp gasp. A tiny bird-like hand twitched against Caleb's chest. Relief flooded him, so intense it made his head swim. She was still there. He didn't go to the hospital immediately. The roads were a graveyard of stalled cars and black ice, and he lived less than half a mile away. He was a trained medic. He knew that a sudden spike in temperature could be as dangerous as the cold. He needed his home. He needed his supplies. When they entered Caleb's house, the silence of the place hit him. For 3 years, this house had been a tomb of memories. Photos of a team that no longer existed, a flag folded into a triangle on the mantel, and the quiet ticking of a clock. But as he set Lucas down on the sofa and laid Emily on a warmed towel by the hearth, the house transformed. It became a field hospital. It became a sanctuary. By 3 a.m., the professional world had descended upon Caleb's quiet living room. The paramedics had come and gone, stabilizing Emily and confirming that Caleb's quick thinking had saved her from permanent organ failure. The police had arrived next. Officer Miller, a man Caleb had known for years, stood in the kitchen, a cup of coffee steaming in his hands. He looked toward the living room where Lucas was fast asleep on the sofa, his hand buried in Titan's thick fur. Titan hadn't moved an inch from the boy's side. "We found her, Caleb," Miller said quietly. Caleb leaned against the counter, his face lined with exhaustion. "The mother?"
2 miles away, in an abandoned warehouse, high as a kite, didn't even know what day it was. When we told her about the kids, she just stared at us. There's no one else. No father on the birth certificate, no grandparents in the system. They're state property now. Caleb looked at the folded flag on his mantle. He thought about the oath he had taken to protect the defenseless. He thought about the way Lucas had looked at him in the snow, like he was the only solid thing in a world made of ice. "They aren't property," Caleb said, his voice rasping. "Look, I know what you're thinking," Miller said, setting the coffee down. "But you're a single man, a veteran with your own history. The social workers, they look for stable family units. They'll put them in a group home tonight and start the foster process on Monday." "A group home?" Caleb's voice rose slightly. "Miller, that boy stayed in a blizzard to protect his sister. You put him in a strange house with 10 other kids tonight, and you'll destroy him. He's already been abandoned once today. It's the law, Caleb." Caleb walked over to the sofa. He looked down at Lucas. The boy was twitching in his sleep, his brow furrowed in a nightmare. Titan looked up at Caleb, his amber eyes pleading, a soft whine vibrating in his throat. "I have a clean record," Caleb said, not looking away from the boy. "I have a 4-bedroom house and a pension, and I have a dog that's already decided he belongs to them." He turned back to the officer. "Call the emergency supervisor. Tell them I'm taking temporary guardianship. Tell them if they want to take these kids into the cold again, they're going to have to walk through me." The first month was the hardest tour of duty Caleb had ever served. Emily had a lingering cough that kept Caleb up through the night, rocking her in a chair that used to be his father's. Lucas was a shadow, following Caleb from room to room, rarely speaking. The boy was waiting for the other shoe to drop. He was waiting for Caleb to say, "I'm going to see a friend, stay here." One Tuesday afternoon, Caleb was in the garage, working on an old motorcycle to keep his hands busy. Lucas was sitting on a stool, watching him with intense, silent focus. "You want to help?" Caleb asked, holding out a wrench.
Lucas hesitated, then took it. "Are you going to keep us?" The question was so quiet, Caleb almost missed it over the sound of the wind outside. He put the rag down and wiped his hands. He knelt so he was at eye level with the boy. "Lucas, when I was in the Navy, we had a saying, the only easy day was yesterday. Life gets hard. People let you down, but a SEAL never leaves his wingman. You and Emily, you're my wingmen now. I've already filed the papers for permanent foster to adopt. As long as you want to stay, this is your home." Lucas looked at the wrench, his small thumb tracing the steel. "Even if I'm not good? Even if Emily cries too much?" Caleb felt a lump in his throat that no amount of grit could swallow. He reached out and ruffled the boy's hair. "Especially then. Titan doesn't leave his post when it rains, does he?" Lucas looked at the dog, who was currently napping on a pile of shop rags. A small, tentative smile flickered on the boy's face. "No, Titan stays." "Then so do I." The seasons in Colorado have a way of blurring together when you're busy. The white of the winter gave way to the pale green of spring, then the dusty gold of a mountain summer. Caleb's life, once a rigid architecture of solitude, was now a beautiful mess. There were plastic blocks in the hallway, there were jars of strained peaches in the pantry, and there was noise, the wonderful, chaotic noise of a life being lived. Titan had undergone a transformation of his own. The war dog had become a nursery dog. He would wait by the door for Lucas to get off the school bus, his tail thumping against the floorboards like a drum. When Emily learned to crawl, she used Titan as a handhold, her small fingers buried in his thick coat. The dog would simply lie there, a patient, fur-covered mountain, guarding his new pack with a fierce, quiet devotion.
But the shadow of the legal system still loomed. The state was thorough. There were home visits, psychological evaluations, and hours of sitting in sterile offices answering questions about his service, his mental health, and his suitability as a father. Mr. Ward, the social worker, a woman named Sarah, had asked during their final visit, "You've spent your life in high-stress environments. Why take this on? You could be traveling, relaxing. You've earned your peace." Caleb looked out the window. In the backyard, Lucas was throwing a ball for Titan, and Emily was sitting in the grass, laughing at the dog's antics. "I thought peace was the absence of noise," Caleb said, "but I was wrong. Peace is knowing that when you go to sleep, the people you love are safe under your roof. I didn't save those kids that night in the park, Sarah. I just picked them up. They're the ones who saved me from a very quiet, very lonely life." 2 years later, December again. The courtroom was quiet, but it wasn't the cold quiet of the park. It was the expectant quiet of a cathedral. Caleb sat at the table, his hand resting on Lucas's shoulder. Lucas was 9 now, taller, his face filled out with health and happiness. Emily sat on Caleb's lap, wearing a bright red dress, busy trying to read a legal brief she had snatched from the table. Titan was at their feet, his chin resting on his paws, a service dog vest strapped to his back so he could be present for the moment. The judge, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes, looked over her spectacles. "In the matter of the adoption of Lucas and Emily Morris," she began, her voice echoing in the chamber, "I find that the petitioner, Caleb Ward, has provided a home of exceptional stability, love, and character. It is the finding of this court that it is in the best interest of the children to be legally joined to this family." She looked at Lucas. "Young man, do you have anything you'd like to say?" Lucas stood up. He wasn't the shaking, blue-lipped boy from the bench anymore. He stood tall, his shoulders back, just like he'd seen Caleb do. "I just wanted to say thank you," Lucas said, his voice steady, "for not leaving us in the snow." The judge smiled and brought the gavel down. Crack.
"Congratulations, Mr. Ward. Or should I say, Dad." As they walked out of the courthouse, a light snow began to fall. Caleb looked up at the sky. The flakes were large and soft, floating down like feathers. 2 years ago, this snow would have felt like a threat. Today, it felt like a celebration. He felt a tug on his hand. Lucas was looking up at him, his eyes shining. "Can we go to the park, Dad? The one with the big trees?" Caleb looked at Titan, then at his daughter, then at his son. He felt a warmth in his chest that no blizzard could ever touch. "Yeah, Lucas," Caleb said, his voice thick with a quiet, powerful joy. "Let's go to the park. We aren't afraid of the snow anymore." And as they walked toward the truck, a man, a dog, and 2 children, the footprints they left in the fresh powder were deep, side by side, and heading in exactly the same direction. Home.